All right, I think we can go ahead and get started now. Thank you all for joining us today. This is the Train and Build webinar series with Elevate Clinical Research Solutions. This webinar is going to be more about site-specific success after industry conferences because we might have a few coming up. But to start, our presenters today will be myself, Alex Straub, and then Gerard Cruz as well. A little bit about Elevate before we jump into the bulk of the presentation. Our staff here, we average around 11 years of experience, either at clinical research sites, CROs, or other vendors in the industry. We really aim to become an extension of your team. We want to serve your goals, not our own corporate goals. The reason a lot of us are working here at Elevate is because we like working with the sites. We definitely want to prioritize quality delivery, personalized service, tailored to your needs, and just be reliable. One thing we really want to focus on is our dedicated player coach, who's going to be assigned to your site and to truly understand your specific needs, your processes, and help improve everything on your end that you might need. So some of the services that we offer here, our main services are the coverage analyses, budget build negotiations, contract red lines and negotiations, and CTMS builds. That's the bulk of our services there, but we also have the train and build, which is what this webinar will focus on. We also have revenue protection and clinical research staffing. But to jump into a little bit about myself and my experience, so I began at a company that specialized in MCA's budgets and contracts. But at the time when I joined, coverage analyses and budgets were completely new to me. So it took me about 6 to 12 months of training to get to a level where minimal corrections would be needed on, a coverage analysis that I would perform. And during that 6 to 12 months, the training was solely on coverage analyses, just because it is very research heavy. There's all different types of indications, drug trials, device trials. There's just a lot to know. Budgets doesn't take quite as long. It took me about 1 to 3 months to get up to speed on budgets and negotiations. There are some intricacies that make budgeting difficult. You definitely need to understand your costs. You need to understand the study requirements, and transferring those costs over to a sponsored budget template isn't always easy. And negotiating those budgets with the sponsor as well aren't easy either. But I was lucky enough to join a team of experts. So I had a team of people to lean on throughout my time there when I was completing coverage analyses, negotiating budgets, things like that. It was just really nice to have someone, a team of people to lean on whenever I had an issue, either completing a CA or I hit a roadblock during negotiations. I didn't have to figure it all out myself. I had experts there to help. And that really helped me get to the point where I can consider myself an expert. At the start, when I first learned how to do a coverage analysis, it might take me, a few days, and then we might take a day or so to, do a quality check on that work, and then maybe I have a ton of revisions. But nowadays, after completing all that training, and I consider myself an expert at this time, it might take me less than a day to complete a coverage analysis, which is a huge change in turnaround times. But I lend my success to the people that I had supporting me throughout that process. Without having people to reach out to that are experts at the time when I wasn't, I probably wouldn't be where I am today. So that's what we're trying to help with you guys as well. If you need help at your sites, that's what we're here for. And so when we we try to hire people on our end who have a lot of knowledge and helpful background, even coming from the sites, understanding how things are done there. It is very valuable experience. But if we do get a new analyst, it's very similar to how I was trained myself. Training is going to take 6 to 12 months. It's going to be a ground up approach. I knew nothing about the industry when I joined. So I needed, the background of clinical research, what's a phase 1 trial, what's a phase 2 trial, things like that. I needed to know what billing compliance was. How does Medicare fit into all of this? The relevant documents. What's a protocol? Where do I look? What's an ICF? What's an IB? Things like that. And for newer analysts, mentorship is very important. We definitely dedicate, one person to be their mentor throughout training and even afterwards. Because it's always nice to just have one person that you can go to, that you can trust and ask questions, and they can be there to help you whenever you need. And tied to that a little bit is the QA process. For new analysts, it's going to be a lot more intense, just because we want to make sure that we stress the quality, and then we want to make sure that they have the quality before we start handing them over to doing actual work. But quality is always more important than quantity. We want to make sure that what we're doing is accurate, correct, especially considering the consequences of an incorrect standard of care designation. Um, that's what we stress before we get to the quantity part of things. But that comes with being an experienced analyst. And if we have experienced analysts come on board, we start by trying to understand the extent of their expertise. We try to figure out what they do know, what they don't know, and then we try to fill in those gaps to try to get them up to speed on our ways of doing things. A lot of people, if they come from the sites or if they work at sites now, they might not understand the industry trends, or they might not just be up to date on, best practices. And that's where we come in, because we have the overarching view across, across the country of what people are doing, what's successful in negotiations, things like that. And then we also need to train them on, internal processes and policies. Those things are going to be a little bit different than how you do it at your, previous company, or how you might do that at, a site. But if you can look at this picture, and this is how we do it internally, it's how we'll also probably do it externally. If we need to come in and train or build up your services, we'll take a look at, the analysts that you do have. We'll understand the extent of their expertise. We'll see, what approach we need to take in terms of training, and fill in the gaps there. And that's what we did internally when we hired Jerry here. And I'll turn it over to him to give him a little bit of a background on his experience here at Elevate. And here you go, here, Jerry.
Appreciate it, Alex. Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. Good morning, everybody. This is Jerry Cruz. I am the Senior Research Clinical Analyst for Elevate Clinical Research Solutions. Like Alex, I joined the research industry, years ago, over almost 9 years ago now, with no experience in healthcare, no experience in research. I came from a banking and a finance background, so everything was new to me. I went to the research billing compliance bootcamps, research conferences over the years. But unfortunately, I didn't have this type of service offered years ago, which, it's great that we have this now, but, I was coming from an environment where there was no quality check support or someone that I could reach out to. So this is where I think this is a service that's very beneficial to sites with regards to research. I worked in different therapeutic areas from cardiovascular, neurology, renal, oncology, emergency medicine research. I've done pretty much all of the the responsibilities, I believe, with research related roles as far as contract negotiations, budget negotiations, coverage analysis, clinical trial management builds, research accounting, and also working on some federally funded research proposals. But I've learned this over the years, just from self teaching. I didn't have the support that some other folks had, so it's I've had to learn it over the course of the years to kind of gain the wealth of knowledge, of research knowledge that I have today. And taking that experience on into this role has been great. This has been a really great. I believe research is a great industry to be in. I love it. I love looking at the new, devices, the new drugs that we get in clinical trials. I love this industry, and so I continue to, to stay in this role, knowing that we're going to help patients, who need this type of care. A little more emphasis into what Alex was going into earlier. Having this type of support, I think, is very important. When you're going to a conference, you learn the basics. You learn, anti-kickback, STAR clause, Q modifiers, what a billing grid looks like, and then you get back to your site. And I worked in the site level for these past years, and you realize, you can learn the basic tools to help you navigate through doing coverage analysis and maybe negotiating with the sponsors. But when you're taking a deep dive into a clinical trial and you're questioning some things as far as whether something is routine care, can your site bill for this? Does this need a modifier? These are the types of questions, and support that Elevate has, that we can, offer our expertise to help your site, get through these obstacles, these challenges. So I think it's something that a new tool, a resource that I think it's going to be great, having this type of service that Elevate now has to sites to help you in negotiating your clinical trials, or just even maintaining research billing compliance through coverage analysis, review, and QA. I wish I had this many years ago, but this is great. This is a great tool.
So tying into what Jerry said, let's say you're going to a conference, there might be one coming up soon. How do you learn how do you turn what you learned there into improvements at your site? You learn a lot of things, but you don't know exactly how to implement them. You don't know exactly what tools you need. And those are some of the questions that you should be asking yourself. Do you have all the tools you need to work on studies immediately? Do you have the internal budget templates built, the charge masters set up? Do you have costs for everything? All the codes that you're going to need, all of the time and effort items. Have you made the estimates for those items? Do you have playbooks in place in terms of your site policies, whether an item is always going to be standard of care at a certain visit, or something like that? And then sometimes you might meet someone at a conference and discuss something, and then you leave and you don't have any way to reconnect with them. Well, we have a hero platform is what we call it, and I'll go into more detail about that later. But it's like a dashboard where you can connect with people you met at conferences, create discussion boards, ask questions, and other people from other sites can reach out and answer them. You can connect with them. People from Elevate will also connect with you as well, answer your questions on that platform. And if you have any immediate help, do you need any immediate help needed at your site in terms of staffing? That's something that Elevate can help with as well. We understand, that in this industry, in clinical trials in general, the work kind of ebbs and flows. You might have a ton of studies currently, but some might wrap up and then you just have a lull of work, and you don't might not need all the staff that would be needed if you had a ton of studies active at your site. We've also learned that quality checks are probably the most important aspect of the coverage analysis process, given it is such a research heavy role. Sorry, my cat's trying to get in the way here. Given it's such a research heavy role or aspect of the of things, having someone else to put a second set of eyes on your work is very important. Even the most experienced analysts will miss something, and you might just not be aware of a certain guideline or side effect, something like that. And that's something that Elevate can help with as well, with this train and build service. Quality checks, we have the experts here, and you might not know what you don't know. So it's definitely important to get a second set of eyes on the coverage analyses. And then train and build, just to give a little bit more details about what train and build actually mean. So for train, that would be training your internal team to become experts in the services, whether that's coverage analysis, budget negotiation, contract redlining, anything like that. And then build would be to build your internal processes, build up your knowledge, your internal templates, your standards, your site policies, and your resources, whether that's like, the playbooks, the templates, the charge masters, things like that. It really is customizable to your needs. Whatever need that you have at your site, we can customize our service to that. Some of the benefits of our train and build service is that it is cost effective. We are already trained, so we can come in there and we can give our support to reduce the errors or inefficiencies, and that'll help reduce future costs as well. It's fully customizable, like I mentioned. So the training materials will be site specific. The playbook for your site will be custom made. We'll structure our training to your site and your needs. The content and the scope of it as well will be tailored to whatever you need. And then we also will provide ongoing expert support. We are the experts here at Elevate, and we don't want to just leave as soon as we're done training you. So we will provide continuous access to ourselves, to our expertise. That could be in the form of a phone call or an email. We're just here to help whenever you need. I'll go into a little bit about that again on the next slide. But also, we just have expert insights. Our recommendations are tailored to your site and to your needs. After we do a thorough review of your current processes and documentation, policies, things like that. We're going to work to refine those and address the pain points and align those with industry best practices, but also what's best for your site as well. But to go back to that call an expert aspect of our service, you might have some questions that keep you up at night. Whether you need help with brainstorming or problem solving. This is an aspect of our train and build service that we're providing. You can just give us a call and we're here to help. Another aspect that I touched on earlier was the HERO community, and the HERO, that stands for Helping Elevate Research Operations. And this is, the community resource where if you do attend a conference and you have some further questions, or maybe you connect with someone at a different site, this is where you can go and get answers from us, either at Elevate or from other sites. We really want to make this into a community of sites where we can grow and share the industry best practices and things like that. here's a little snapshot of it. We are live at the moment. This is what our website looks like. And this is the Hero Community Resources. It'll be up there at the top to indicate. On our site as well, we do have previous webinar recordings. We had the first one on budgeting questions and another one on coverage analyses. I just want to say thank you all for your time here. We do have plenty of time left in this webinar. So I do want to open up the floor to any questions that people might have. We did field some questions earlier, so we can fill in some time there. But if you guys want to start entering in some questions that you might have, either regarding the train and build service itself, our expertise on coverage analyses, or budgets, CTMS, anything like that, or our call-in expert service, whatever questions you may have. We can give a minute or two to get some to trickle in, while I pull up some of the ones that we got previously. Okay, Jerry, do you want to pull up the questions and maybe start with one of those that we got previously?
Sure. So looks like we have a question. The question is, what is your recommendation if you are uncertain about all the appropriate CPT codes for a particular item or service? So if you're not sure about the CPT code, and I run into this situation all the time, you may encounter a clinical trial that you're not familiar with the procedure, or maybe some of the diagnostics that are being performed. I would say, if you have a billing research tool, I would, Google's always your friend, but I would look it up through your research billing tool. And we typically, if you're not sure about a designation, I would put in, what, based on your research or what you review, an appropriate CPT code. I would put that, plus we typically here recommend putting an XXXXX to indicate that it's an unknown. It may be an unknown CPT code at the time that you may be billing for, or that your site may be billing for, that may not be necessarily listed on a research or a billing or coding reference tool. So best practice is just, list that out, so that way that there may be an unknown CPT code that may be involved with that procedure or that diagnostic, perhaps, just to make sure you cover all your bases.
Thank you, Jerry. We do have another question here. Can you speak more to your staffing's clinical and medical experience on average? So I'll start with my own experience. So I started by processing the payments between the sponsor and the site. I worked for a third-party vendor on behalf of sponsors. We would get the money from the sponsor and disperse that out to the sites. From there, I did join the the coverage analysis budget team. That's when I had a few years there, and then I moved over to a large CRO where I built the internal budgets for clinical trials, for studies, and I also worked on some anti-bribery, anti-kickback stuff there as well. And then and I'll pass it over to Jerry as well, since after that I joined Elevate. So Jerry.
Sure. Yeah. So I worked at the site level at a hospital almost 8.5 years ago, and I had no research experience. I learned clinical and medical knowledge over the years, working with the physicians and the research clinical coordinators doing our clinical trials. I found out what labs were, BMP, CMPs, echoes, EKGs. I learned all the clinical terminology and some of the diagnostics and labs and things like that over the course of the years, working closely with our research staff, our principal investigators. And that's just how I developed the knowledge of clinical experience over the course of the years. I've only worked at the site up until this point and joining Elevate. So my focus was really just looking at site level. It was really not unless I went to a conference to learn other things as far as additional clinical medical experience from research conferences. It was mostly at the site level, working with our medical staff.
Yeah, and to speak on the rest of our team members here, they all come from either a CRO or a site or a third party vendor within the industry. They all come from that background. And that's why training is one of the most important aspects of this role, and to know how to complete a coverage analysis, or even negotiate a budget or a contract within this industry. Training is vital because of the medical aspect of it. That it's very difficult coming from maybe a finance background, and you know how to do a budget, or a legal background, and you know how to redline a contract, but then you come over to the clinical research industry or the medical side of things, and then you hear a bunch of terms that you don't understand. And that's why training is so important here, and that's what we're trying to get out with this train and build service. Is you know it is hard to find people with direct experience performing coverage analyses, budgets for clinical trials, and contracts for clinical trials. So having the ability to have people like us who do have that experience come in and train your people, I think is very, it's important, and, it's good to have as well. Let's see here. Do we have any other questions? Jerry, do you have any on your end?
There was a couple of other questions.
Let's see.
The question is, can you still bill for an item of service if there is an LCD, but your Medicare carrier or MAC is not listed? So to answer that question, an LCD may apply to an item or service, but it may not apply to your specific location or your medical affairs committee region. So it's always best to confirm that information before using that LCD, local coverage determination supporting language or reference when you're doing your coverage analysis. Just double check and make sure that it's covered.
Okay, we have another question here on if we have any former clinicians on staff, such as a registered nurse. I can speak to myself. I'm not a former clinician. Jerry, I believe you aren't either. I don't believe we do have anybody with direct clinical experience in that form. That's definitely something as we grow in the future we could look into, because as we are performing coverage analyses, there might be things that come up in a protocol that we do need that sort of expertise on. On our side, someone to ask a question, but we do, we have our own experience as well, coming across those situations, throughout our own experience performing coverage analyses and the thousands of protocols that we've reviewed throughout our time as well. But thank you for that question. Let's see, we have another one here. If an item or service has both an LCD and an NCD, what should I use for reference in my coverage analyses? I would say both. It depends on what they say, but you definitely need to at least review both. The LCD would sort of trump the NCD if it was more limiting. but you definitely need to reference both in your analysis. Let's see, Jerry, do you have one on your end? Let's see if we have another one coming through.
How much, yeah, we have a question. How much overhead should I include when I'm negotiating with the sponsor on a trial? Well, that really all depends on how much your site, and I think that's site specific. That's a site specific question. How much overhead is your site incurring when you're doing the clinical trials? So you may need to reach out to your your finance team, or find out exactly how much overhead, what's included in your overhead costs, equipment, staffing, that's not covered by the clinical trial, and take that in consideration when you're doing an internal financial analysis to determine what is a good overhead rate to include when you're negotiating your clinical trials. That's a great question.
Yeah, and to add on to that as well, we also are aware of the industry trends for what sites are requesting for overhead. And the standards of which sponsors would accept a certain overhead percent. We understand the range there, and what we could get in negotiations. Okay, here's another one. When doing coverage analyses and budgets, what is your QA process? So currently, let's say we have an analyst assigned to complete a coverage analysis. They complete it to the best of their ability. We want to make sure that when they complete that, it's something that they would be comfortable, sending to the site. They or assuming it is final at that moment, but we still send it to QA. And then from there, it's reviewed. We have a checklist for what we need to review in each of the different areas of not only the coverage analysis, but we also review the protocol and other relevant documents, making sure that every area that needs to be reviewed was reviewed, and everything that needs to be included in the coverage analysis or budget is included. And then, we make notes on if changes are needed. And then that's sent back to the analyst who originally completed it. And then those changes are made, and then we can get that sent back out when it's completed. We do another check to make sure that the changes were implemented correctly as well. But yeah, that's what our QA process looks like, internally at least.
And just to add that to Alex's comments, we also look at making sure the documents align. So the budget, the protocol, CTA, consent form, make sure all the language aligns. If there's any services or costs associated, making sure that's all documented and it all matches up. Yeah.
That is a good point, because sometimes you do see that maybe the ICF says something that contradicts what the protocol says or the contract. So yeah, we double check across all. We do a document alignment where we check all the various documents to make sure that the language all says and means the same thing across the board.
We have another question, Alex, looks like.
Okay. What is a realistic turnaround time for coverage analysis and budget development? For coverage analysis, I would say a realistic turnaround time, if you factor in all things considered, I would say 5 or 10 business days, depending on the complexity of the study. For budget development, that could be down to 2 to 5 business days. It all depends on the complexity of the study, the workload at the time, priority status, things like that. In terms of, completing a budget negotiation, realistically, that all depends on the sponsor. I know, the goal is really like 30 days, but 45 days sometimes happens, and then sometimes a lot longer happens as well because of unexpected delays, things like that. I'm sure you all know how negotiations can go for budgets. Um,
Alex, so just to add to that, like you
mhm,
mentioned, like sometimes we have delays in the development, and that could be just the factors, outside factors that are out of your control. So maybe you're waiting on staffing, time, and effort. There's some additional costs associated with, the budget that you're still waiting on information for. So just considering the factors that are maybe outside of your control that may cause, further delay in that. But typically, as Alex said, I think
mhm.
that's a good estimate. Yeah.
Okay. What specifically do you review in the CTA for CA alignment outside of the budget? Um, the main aspect or the main area that I look for is what is provided for free, and that's usually outside of the budget. That's usually in a separate area in the contract, and usually that's just the study drug or the study device. But I just want to make sure that that language is the same as what the protocol is indicating, the ICF is indicating, and then what our coverage analysis will then indicate as well. Um, so if, for example, you go into the CTA and it says the study drug is provided, then you go to the ICF and it says the study drug is provided, and then you go to the budget and it says that the study drug is invoiced as pass through. Um, so that's where we want to do the alignment. It says it's provided in two areas, but then maybe the patient might have to get it themselves based on what the budget says. So that's why we look at all the different documents just to make sure they're all aligned. Because further down the road, we don't want any issues to come up regarding that. Okay, let's see here. I'm going to ask this question to you, Jerry, actually. Can you bill for a sham procedure if it's part of a study?
Uh, I would say it depends. In my experience with sham procedures, they're typically not covered, so it's a very tricky situation. I would say err on the side of caution. I would say market as paid by the sponsor. I know sponsors typically when it comes to sham procedures, they're going to say it's well, it should be routine care, and if you're billing that for the for the investigational arm. But I would say definitely do research, verify that sham procedure is in fact billable before you consider doing moving forward with that budget. But typically, I would say market is sponsor paid, not billable, and that could also affect blinding. I'm sorry. Yeah. So
Oh, that's true as well. Yeah. Um, Good point. Good point. Thank you for that. Let's see if we have another question here. Let's see on the first one we got. Okay, so what if a sponsor offers reimbursement for an item or service in the study budget, but you have classified the item or service as standard of care? Okay, so the sponsor is offering to pay for the item, but you think it is standard of care. I would say you get to choose what you want to do. We see that some people accept or some sites accept the payment from the sponsor, and then others will reject the payment and mark it as standard of care. It all depends on what your internal standards are, what your processes are, and what your goal is. I would say there's benefits to both scenarios, but definitely you could go either way on that one.
and just make sure you don't double bill. You don't
Yeah,
take
that that's
payment from the
that's the
sponsor
big
and
thing
bill it.
there.
Yeah.
Making sure that you're aligned in the coverage analyses and the budget. That's why the document alignment, also going back to that, is a huge part of what we do. If the coverage analysis says something is standard of care, then the budget also needs to say that as well, and vice versa. If it says that it needs to be sponsor paid, it also needs to say that in the internal document as well. Um, Yeah. Okay. Good question there. Let's see. Do we have anything else on this end?
Alex, I have one. What if
Okay.
there are no supporting guidelines to justify that an item or service is billable for a particular procedure, okay, or diagnosis, but there is medical reasoning to perform that item or service? What's your take on that one, Alex?
Um, you have medical reasoning, but no guidelines. I would say it also depends on what your site's internal standards or processes are, but it might be necessary to stretch some guidelines to fit what you think is medically necessary. Um, we also have scenarios where principal investigators have said that something is standard of care where we haven't found support. But we trust their judgment, and if there's been success getting something covered in the past, we want to trust that that would be the same going forward. Um, but yeah, so a lot of that would be just tailored to whatever your site's standards and policies are regarding that.
And just to add to that, Alex, just, as a site, don't be afraid to push back to the sponsor. If you can find justification on a guideline or any medical reasoning or your PI, just because your PI says everything is routine care. Well, yeah, you can put reasoning and documentation in his physician notes, but don't be afraid to push back to the sponsor if you can find justification. That's
Especially when
something
it
I had to
comes
learn over
to
the years. It's just, don't be
yeah,
afraid to push back.
especially when it comes to the risk. It all lands on the site when it comes to
Absolutely,
billing.
it's the
So
site. Yep.
that's something that sponsors really need to understand when it comes to determining whether something is standard of care or not. Um, okay,
Great
I think we
question.
have time for maybe one or two more questions. I'll throw this one your way, Jerry. What type of fees should I include in my budget?
Um, there's a lot.
That's a
There's a
very
lot of fees to
general
include.
question. Yeah.
So you have to break it up, I would say, into two categories. Mainly the per patient budget and what's going to be included per patient based on the protocol, the study visits, what's inclusive. And then don't forget to include administrative costs. There's costs associated outside of the per patient budget, which is like administrative startup costs. It costs money to get a trial up and running in your site, to review it, to pharmacy fees, getting that up and running, imaging startup, things like that, and other things as well as time and effort where outside of the per patient budget, maybe there's monitoring fees involved. You want to consider that, making sure you're compensated for that time and effort. Serious adverse event reporting, that's not necessarily always included, and some sponsors will, may or may not include it in your budget. Keep that in mind, as well as when the study's done. There's costs associated with that, with archiving, storage of documents. You also may have a storage platform, electronic storage platform that's charging you a maintenance fee every year, or when the record is closed. So keep that in mind when you're negotiating your budgets. Um, but yeah, that's a good question, and there may be other fees to consider as well. One thing I will add is when you're negotiating a budget, keep in mind that you may designate some items as routine care, especially a baseline. I'm going to, a lot of trials have routine care items a baseline. Well, guess what? If it's out of window, you're going to have to repeat that for the purposes of the study. Otherwise, you're going to take a deviation. So make sure you consider that as maybe, as a backup, have that as invoiceable or repeatable, as a repeatable item, and get reimbursement for that just in case it happens. It never hurts to have that as a backup. So,
Yeah,
a
to
great
your
question.
point, there are a lot of hidden costs that show up, and that's why even a document alignment is important for this as well, because I've seen scenarios where the ICF might say that there's, for example, a pregnancy test is occurring, but the protocol mentioned nothing. So that's where you want to make sure that you're looking at every document that's relevant to the study to ensure that anything that's going to cost you money is something that you can include into the budget, whether it's standard of care or not, if you need to be reimbursed for it, or if it's something that's going to incur costs, it's something that needs to be analyzed on whether who's going to pay it or not. But okay, I don't know if we have any more questions here. Let me just take a look. But otherwise, we could end a bit early. Um, if you do have any further questions after this webinar, here's some contact information for us. We have phone number, email, the website. Again, I want to encourage you all to check out our Hero community discussion board, ask questions. Feel free to do that after any upcoming, clinical research conferences. But otherwise, I appreciate you all for your time. We can give you some time left in your day. But yeah, I appreciate everything, and looking forward to hopefully hearing from you guys in the future.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry, as well.